and welcome to this week's Hocus Focus. I'm SARA MONDAINI.
And I'm Thomas Sheridan.
And thank you so much for joining us again this week. And the response to last week's seafaring episode was brilliant. And also thank you to everyone who watched the first Witching Hour. And I'm glad it was so well received. And I'm working on another one for you at the moment. And I was a little bit overwhelmed actually by all the kind words. So thank you again for your support with that. It meant a lot.
And I enjoyed that too. I was worried going to sleep listening to it in case some loud noise would jump up, but the sound levels were perfect. So you've honed your craft.
Getting there, yes. I took extra care that there was no unnecessary loud bangs or noises. Yeah.
Sometimes I will be listening to. I often fall asleep to audiobooks, and I'll be just like drifting out of consciousness, and then an ad will start, and it's like literally I'm reaching for a defibrillator. It comes out of nowhere at the worst point, you know.
That is so true. It's so true. You kind of lay there thinking, what was that? What was going on? Am I dead? Am I alive? So yeah, I took them out. I took those mid-rolls out because I don't want to be responsible for anybody having a heart attack. Anyway, let's get started with tonight's episode. Our first topic this evening is all about an infamous Irish duo named Burke and Hare, who took resurrectionism a step further than grave robbing. Greyfriars Churchyard in Edinburgh underwent a gruesome time that plagued Scotland for over a century with body snatching, and it became so prevalent that in order to safeguard the resting places of the deceased, iron cages were erected over the graves, but nothing seemed to be able to deter the relentless robbers. And this sinister trade thrived because Scotland's anatomy and physiology universities demanded more cadavers for dissection than the legal channels could provide for them from dead criminals. And by the 1820s, Edinburgh University had over 1,000 medical students, and the legal supply of cadavers was far from sufficient to meet the needs of the medical community. And that coincided with a reduction in the number of executions. And as a result, the demand for bodies began to outweigh the available corpses. And the deficit was partly due to the stringent laws surrounding dissection, which then, at that time, limited the source of bodies to executed criminals. And that resulted in a clandestine market for cadavers. Now, Dr. Robert Knox was a renowned lecturer in anatomy and physiology at Edinburgh University at the time, and eventually he would come to depend on the services of Burke and Hare as his body suppliers. Now, William Burke, who was originally from County Tyrone in Ireland, served in the army before abandoning his family and moving to Scotland. And there he met Helen MacDougall, and they moved to Edinburgh, where he then met William Hare, who was also a fellow Irish immigrant from the same area. Now, the trio opened a lodgings house in Edinburgh. Burke was said to be a very charming man, a ladies' man, whereas Hare was quite abrupt and brutal. And their dark partnership began on November the 29th, 1827, when a soldier who was staying in their lodging house passed away, and he owed rent. And so, faced with an unpaid rent bill, they decided to sell the body to doctors at the university. And they swapped the corpse with tanner's bark and delivered it to Dr. Knox, which then started their infamous business collaboration. And Burke and Hare's murderous spree claimed the lives of at least 16 victims, including tenants who were staying at their lodging house. And the victims were unsuspecting and oblivious to the fate that awaited them. And the duo's modus operandi was chillingly calculated. Hare would sit on the victim's legs, while Burke would press his thumb under the chin and draw his fingers together to asphyxiate them. And this gruesome act became known as burking. And on Halloween night in 1828, Burke lured an elderly Irish woman named Mrs. Doherty to their residence under the guise of a Halloween party. and a violent altercation ensued, and Mrs. Doherty vanished and was never seen again. And the police investigation led them to Burke's house, where her lifeless body was then discovered. When Burke and Hare faced trial, Hare was offered complete immunity in exchange for his testimony. So on Christmas Eve, 1828, the trial began, and it concluded on Christmas Day. And Burke was convicted of 3 murders and subsequently executed, with a crowd of over 20,000 people witnessing his demise. And the people living in the tenements overlooking the scaffold were able to make a few quid by hiring out the rooms for people to get a better view. And people paid between 5 and 20 shillings to watch Burke's demise from the windows of the tenements. Hare got his immunity, and he was last seen heading for England. He was never seen again, and nobody knows where he ended up, or whether he killed again or not. Dr. Knox, who was never prosecuted, saw his career ruined by the scandal, and he relocated to London. It was never proven if Dr. Knox knew if the bodies were murdered. Some historians say yes, others say no, and some say he didn't want to know or he didn't care. And the trial of Burke and Hare contributed to the passing of the Anatomy Act 1832, which is an act of Parliament in the United Kingdom that gave free licence to doctors, teachers, and anatomy and medical students to dissect donated bodies, and it was brought in as a result of the public revulsion at the illegal trade in corpses. Before this act, there was only the Murder Act 1752, which, as I mentioned earlier, stipulated that only the corpses of executed murderers could be used for dissection. And in an appropriate twist of justice and an end to this story, William Burke's skeleton now resides in an anatomical museum displayed for all to see, where he's denied eternal rest in hallowed ground, as further punishment and a reminder of the crimes that he committed. And there's a rhyme that was also said to circulate around Edinburgh. Up the close and down the stair, Butt and Ben wi' Burke and Hare. Burke's the butcher, Hare's the thief, and Knox is the boy that buys the beef. So that's Burke and Hare. What do you make of all that?
Well, that's all new to me. I didn't know an awful lot. I didn't even know they were Irish. I just knew the story that they were the famous body snatchers that they sold as medical cadavers. But I had no idea until I heard this that they actually were murdering poor people. Now, there's a lot to unpack here. You know, how complicit were the authorities in the crimes, and why did they make one allowed to do a plea bargain, and then the other one instantaneously executed on Christmas Day? It sounds to me that they had information on people in the universities of the higher ups who were very happy or knew that they'd killed people for fresh cadavers or something, rather than old ones pulled up out of the grave. So that's an interesting thing as well. The rush trial Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, and then bam, an execution right off the bat. That's very interesting. And then the other guy disappears to England and is never seen again. And that sounds to me like they said to him, "Well, we'll let you live. You just vanish." Or maybe they took him out later. You know, they might have told him he was free, but he might have met a nasty end, as they say. Now, this was a very evil thing back in the day, because a lot of Protestants believed that you couldn't go to heaven unless all your body parts were intact. You couldn't. You had to have everything. And there's lots of stories of, condemned murderers writing letters begging not to have their bodies chopped up if they're hanged or anything like that, or to have their head buried with them if they're being beheaded, because they believed that you wouldn't go to heaven unless you had everything. And I remember I worked with this guy, and he told me that during the War of Independence in Ireland, a street that he lived on, Camden Street, there was an awful thing happened. Some British soldiers captured some rebels and summarily executed them, but they were caught almost instantaneously by the other side, who shot the British soldiers dead. and his grandmother had walked up and saw the dead British soldiers' brains hanging out, and she was only a little girl, and she put the brains back into his skull using his hat because she said the poor man won't get to heaven otherwise. So, I mean, people lived in a very dark world today, back then, compared to where we live now. And so what Burke and Hare was doing, you say, okay, it's bad enough they were killing people, but even the act of stealing bodies and chopping them up was considered really wicked and evil. But yeah, I would definitely, almost certainly assume that the high polloi in Edinburgh were more than aware if they were killing people, and the people at the universities and so on like that, and let them away with it. This is why tons of bodies have been found in like Abraham Lincoln's house in I think Washington, I think it is, or Philadelphia, and also like old universities over the world, all over the world, when they're digging them up, well, over Europe and North America, when they're renovating like buildings that are 200 years old, they'll find sometimes hundreds of bodies, hundreds of skulls and everything in the basements. So it just goes to show how big it was. It's a murder story and a hauntology story. But is there any Fortean elements to it? Like, is there any stories of like them becoming the bogeyman or something like that years later? Especially one of them being on the prowl, on the loose, I mean.
No, not that I've come across, but I did find it remarkably similar to Fred West and Rose West, because they had lodging houses and they were murdering the tenants. So I did find it quite similar to that, and I did wonder, was there some connection there? I don't know, past life connection, or just some kind of, did Hare, who had it away on his toes and allegedly went off to England somewhere, is he somehow connected to that family? That crossed my mind. I did wonder about that.
And also the way Hare grasped up Burke, and Rose West grasped up her husband Fred. Exact same thing happened.
And the wife was involved with this as well. Burke's wife, she helped to run the guest house as well, the lodgings.
And they both hanged in prison. Well, they both hanged. One hung himself, and the other one was hung by the state.
Yeah.
What year did the trial happen around?
The Burke and Hare.
Yeah.
1828.
So it was way before Jack the Ripper or anything like that.
Yes, same century, but quite a bit before. But the social and economic conditions would have been pretty dire, kind of the same as at the time of the Ripper. Lots of poverty, lots of stark differences between the working class and the upper middle class and the hoity-toity. So they're doing a lot of desperation, and I think just doing what you can day to day to survive, to put food on the table.
Yeah, and it was also a time of great change. That was the start of the Industrial Revolution and the building of the railways and people moving about in large numbers, migration and immigration, that kind of thing. Yeah, very interesting. Honest to God, I had no idea there were murderers until this evening. It just goes to show what, like, they were psychopaths, but they were also in the service of psychopaths.
Yeah, because what I don't understand is why it had to take something like Burke and Hare to make a change to the law. Why was it not suggested earlier that bodies could be used with consent for medical science? So why was it only the dead bodies of murderers that they could use? It was almost like, I don't know, there was some kind of sacrificial thing going on with the higher ups, that they were getting some kick out of it because they knew they were dead bodies, because it would have been so easy to get that law changed and say, you can have extra bodies for your anatomy and physiology classes, and to do the study of the body, and to look into diseases on dead bodies for the sake of medicine. You can have all the bodies you need if you can get the consent of the relatives. But that was never passed until after this trial. That doesn't make sense to me.
In the late 1700s, the biggest export from Ireland to England was skulls, human skulls. And they used to make medicine out of human skulls. They used to ground them down and make medicines out of them. They believed that if you if you drank a liquid made from a crushed human skull, it would cure all kinds of ailments. And they would also use the teeth for dentures and that kind of thing. But just imagine that, it was like such a weird, and also the Freemasons used to use skulls in all their rituals, and there was so many Freemasonic lodges back then, thousands of them. But
It does make you wonder if there was some occult aspect to the bodies and what they were, the bodies being murdered or dug up from the graves and passed on to the doctors and the lecturers at the university. It does make you wonder.
Yeah, and what you call it, Edinburgh is Freemason Central. All those royal societies were all located there. Even today, when you go there, it's this the city centre is beautiful, but it's also kind of like a gothic horror film as well. These fabulous like university buildings and stuff like that. Yeah, that place was like Freemason Central, big time. So there would have been all kinds of not stuff like weird stuff going on. Tons of it actually
Well,
among the establishment.
just to put a bit more of a macabre angle onto it, Burke, whose skeleton is now on display in a museum, they took his skin and they bound a book with his skin, and that book is also next to him in the museum. And I'll put the placemat on the picture on here for you to see.
Well, what they're admitting there is they did that with other people's skin. You know, that's them like it was, oh, they bound a book in ironically in Burke's skin as a kind of a post-mortal punishment. What they're really telling you is that's what they always did. In fact, I often wondered going to these like famous libraries, like the Long Library in Trinity with all these books, and how many of them are actually bound in human skin. I'd love to know.
Yeah.
I'd love to know how many Bibles are bound in human skin, how many books in the Library of Congress, in the British Museum, the British Library are bound in skin, but they don't tell you, they don't tell you.
How many of those bodies, I'm thinking, were used perhaps in occult rituals, magical rituals, when you need certain body parts and blood and things to do certain blood rituals? Were they used for that as well?
Yeah. See, it seems, it's just a straightforward story, and even the way the well-to-do paid money to people in tenements to get a good view, and some of the numbers you told me then would have been a huge amount of money back then. It would have been equivalent of thousands of pounds today just to see this guy killed. Was that some kind of weird ritual thing going on, or weird sexual fetish thing or something?
It does make you wonder.
It does.
And it's such an infamous crime. There's books and there's been TV series and films made about it, so it's quite a famous one as well. So usually when they get that famous, there's usually something more behind it.
Yep. Or were they the occultists themselves, who had the power of necromancies or something like that, to raise, like what Dee and Kelly did in the churchyard in Preston, were they able to do that themselves? And didn't have the body to bother digging the bodies up. They would find ways to get the bodies to dig themselves up.
It does make you wonder about galvanation as well. Was there a bit of that going on?
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of people were buried alive back then, or lived in terror of it. That's what the Edgar Allan Poe premature burial, and it was made to a phenomenal film with Ray Milland, and that people had to incorporate all kinds of complexes device like that would ring bells and stuff in case they woke up in their coffins. That's why the rich were often not buried in coffins; they're buried in mausoleums, so the coffin would be left unscrewed on top of the slab. So by any chance they woke up, they would be able to come to take their key out of pocket, open their mausoleum from the inside. And you know what? It happened a few times. It happened. I remember there was at least 2 cases of it in France. Like the person actually woke up and unlocked the mausoleum and came out. Yeah, because they were going to comas, and they're going through a deep coma where the heart would beat once, every 4 minutes or something, the doctor would declare them dead, and they wouldn't be dead. Yeah.
That's horrific. That
Oh,
really is horrific.
have you seen the film Premature Burial with Ray Milland? He digs his own. Oh, it's fantastic, fantastic, and it's funny. Like there's the grave diggers are whistling as they're digging the grave of they're Irish guys whistling Molly Malone, and they open the coffin and the father's is on the inside like this. He's been trying to claw his way out of the coffin. Oh, that film is for its time. I believe when it came out in the cinema, because I've got a book of horror films, there were actually people fainting and stuff when that scene came out.
I think it's the thought of it, isn't it, that makes you faint. You just imagine what that must be like. I don't know. That's just terrifying. That's as terrifying as the thought of being at the bottom of the ocean with all that weight on top of you in a tiny submersible to me.
Well, I'm somewhat claustrophobic, and which is weird because I can go into caves and stuff as long as I have the vertical clearance. Even if I have to go on my hunkers, I don't feel too bad. But if it gets tight up, I start freaking out.
Yeah, if you stood up, it's not so bad. But if you have to crouch down and it's above your head, they're just there.
I can do that. I can do that one. But to actually lie on my belly and stuff like that, I can't.
You just brought the memory of the Borderlands back to me again. The final scene of the Borderlands back to me, which was
Oh yeah,
a
yeah. Well,
horrific
that's
one. Anyway, I just want to add, Burke and Hare have a 2010 black comedy with Simon Pegg and Andy Serkis and Isla Fisher, which I haven't seen it, but I was looking at it today on the internet, reading about it and having a look at the trailer, and it does look quite good. So I'm going to give that a watch.
Yeah, I might give that a gander myself. And check out Premature Burial if you want to. We won't review it for the show, but just as at home, you guys, if you want to watch a classic horror film, that's still scary as Premature Burial.
What year is that, Thomas?
I think it came out in the early 60s.
Is it black and white?
It was, I think, it was around the no, it's color, but it's around the time Roger Corman was making all those horror films like the Mask of the Red Death and all that. So, and it was when Ray Milland was a big star. The man with the X-ray eyes. He did a lot of kind of horror films around that period.
What do you think about the moral dilemma to it? In the sense that did the number of people that were saved through the medical breakthroughs, did that outweigh what they were doing when they were digging up the graves? I'm not talking about the murdering of people. I'm talking about the digging up of the cadavers. There's a kind of
there's a kind of a weird dichotomy there, isn't there? A moral dilemma.
Yeah,
maybe. Do you know why they do live? They do not live, but they do gone out. But they do the cadaver dissections in medical college. You know the reason for that is because that's the one that test them before the ones who faint. You know right there and then if you're going to be a doctor. You know that kind of a thing. Yeah, so it's used almost as a test.
Yeah.
There's plenty of people who went to medical college and got that far and said, "No, I'm out."
Yeah, and what a shame for those people that got through that test and had the stomach of an ox, and they could become really good doctors, only to then today sell themselves out to what they've sold themselves out to.
Well, there was about University College London back in 2010, 10 or 11, did a survey and did a research program on psychopathy, and they number 3 on the list for psychopaths was surgeon.
Right.
Psychopaths make excellent surgeons because they don't worry about if I'm killing someone's wife or daughter here.
Yeah.
They love the big money and the prestige that goes with it, and their egos are, when someone comes in, they pull off a heart transplant, they go like, yes, kind of thing. So and then they get paid big bucks for it, and they have the prestige. So yeah, surgeons was number 3 in people who tested for the DSM checklist in psychopathy. I think it was after lawyers and journalists. So look at where we are today.
Well, you just put me in mind of when I had to go down for an operation many years ago, and I was quite scared. And as they were wheeling me down to go give me the anaesthetic, I was proper crying, upset, didn't want to get on the bed to have it done. And the surgeon came in and said, "What?" She was an Irish lady actually, and she said, "What's the matter with you?" I'm a grown woman, you know, and I said, I'm frightened I'm going to die. I don't want to do it. And she said, "Oh, there'll be no deaths on my table tonight. I've got a dinner appointment at 7:30. And she wasn't joking. She was deadly serious.
It's just the job. When I was having my operation, as the anaesthetist was putting the gas on me, and he says, "What do you do then, Thomas?" I says, "Well, I like painting." And he goes, "Yeah." He says, "So if you die of painting, it'll be worth a lot more." But it made me feel better, funny enough. It made me feel better.
Oh, that this didn't, because she wasn't. I thought I was waiting for the chuckle and the laugh, and it didn't come. She was deadpan.
Just well, she's probably psycho. Yeah, just a job, just a thing. Yeah.
Yeah, so I really need you. I really need to hear that before I go under. Anyway, I went under, and I'm still here, so it's all good.
Yeah, but also when you think about it, she wasn't going to mess you up. You know, the kind of a thing. So she was obviously all business. Funny.
Yeah, I haven't got this. I never had the stomach to do anything like that. I'm not very good. I'm a bit squeamish.
Yeah, same. Isn't the word Burke in England a slang word for an idiot?
Yeah, Burke. Yeah, an idiot.
And he was the one who hung.
Yeah.
So
So that was Burke and Hare, and we'd be really interested to know your thoughts as to what may have been going on behind the scenes with these two and Dr. Knox. Was it just a simple case of two men seeing an opportunity and making money, or do you think there was some more occult meaning behind it all, and the doctors and the university knew exactly where the bodies were coming from? Please leave your thoughts and opinions in the comments.
And starting in this episode of Hocus Focus, we have a new feature. We've asked our friend Olivia from Sun, Moon, Self Astrology to give us regular updates on the psychic global astrology of the period ahead. And the name of the new segment we've called Eye on Sky, because there's two reasons for this. It's as a catchy name. I really like the name, but also there are, when you look to auguries, you often look to the sky. And in the daytime, clouds, birds, movements of animals, and stuff like that. When you look at auguries at night, you look to the stars and the planets and so on. And I think that we live in an age where we need another kind of guidance, as above, so below, and that's why we've started this new segment. So here we are, Anya Dew, and don't forget to sign up for her channel, and she also does personal readings. Olivia with Eye on Sky.
We have a few celestial events coming up in October, and the first one is when Mercury enters Libra on October 5th. Libra is the most logical and rational sign of all, so this transit can help us become more rational and better able to discern, maybe even better at putting on a poker face. It can bring about a heightened sense of justice, a less emotional approach in general, and a greater need for orderly harmony and also beauty, an aesthetically pleasing environment, whatever this means for us individually. And it also can bring better business ideas, for example, or just simply more creativity in general. And overall, a greater emphasis on harmony and diplomacy rather than confrontation. On October 7th, Venus leaves the retrograde shadow zone, which means that Venus retrograde is going to be history forever, at least until the next time around. And the shadow zone is special because the influence of the retrograde, the issues that can come up therein, is going to be emphasized for some people. So therefore, the shadow can be a bit more complicated for some people than the actual retrograde itself. Venus enters Virgo on October 9th. Venus is the lesser benefic, the greater benefic is Jupiter, and Venus is of course the goddess of love, so associated with love, money, beauty, but also self-esteem and pleasure in life. Venus is in fall in Virgo, which means that the planet's energies aren't expressed very well in this zodiac sign, because Virgo is a bit too preoccupied with perfectionism and also tends to be a little bit paranoid, tends to overthink, and it can be quite nitpicky and not the very most confident sign of all. So this is not a sign that Venus feels very comfortable in at all. And we might feel this on a personal level with less joy in our lives in general, or our love lives might be a bit dull and not that much free-flowing pleasure during this time. On October 10th, Pluto goes direct, but the shadow period, which I mentioned before for Venus, of course, every planet has this. This shadow period is going to last until February 1st, 2024. So this is when Pluto is finally going to be in Aquarius. And this is more likely to be felt on a global level rather than a personal level, because this is an outer planet or a generational planet, which means world events are probably more affected by it. This could manifest in open struggles between the powers that be or want to be, and important figures on the world stage or political arena might emerge or be challenged. So basically anything with political power. Mars enters Scorpio on October 12th. Mars is the traditional ruler of Scorpio. During this period, our focus is going to be more on self-preservation and self-defense, but also determining which fights are worth fighting. We have a new moon solar eclipse in Libra on October 14th. This can be a new cycle concerning relationships and establishing a more harmonious balance in our lives, because Libra is the ultimate relationship sign and also the ultimate negotiator, but also a sign that is very prone to making compromises. So this could be a wake-up call for some people to stop being a people pleaser, for example. Mercury enters Scorpio on October 22nd and will be exactly conjunct Mars on October 27th for about 2 days. So this will be echoing Mars' Scorpio attitude, which is all about self-defense, but also not being afraid of the deeper realms of the mind and getting to the bottom of things. On October 23rd, the Sun enters Scorpio, and the mood of Scorpio season is usually quite intense. It can also bring about some drama or a bold attitude, maybe because of Mars, the traditional ruler of Scorpio, and also a more deeply investigative, emotionally complicated and spiritual energy, which is represented by the modern ruler Pluto. And Scorpio is a highly misunderstood sign, but it has a lot of great qualities that we can now focus on bringing forward. For example, the deep spirituality and deep insight into things and seeing through deceptions. But we might also be challenged to overcome certain issues about self-esteem, self-worth, and being maybe a little bit too paranoid at times. On October 28th, we have a full moon partial lunar eclipse in Taurus, and the Taurus-Scorpio axis is very much about the down-to-earth physical level in collaboration with, not versus, the deep, hidden, complex, emotional side of things and also spirituality that seeks expression and integration. So this can be interesting for people who maybe are struggling with finding a balance between their material existence and deep spiritual questions or questions of self-worth. There are a few red alert days. The first one is Mercury in Virgo, exactly opposite Neptune retrograde in Pisces on October 2nd, which lasts about 1 day. So these red alert days could be a little bit complicated or difficult. This day in particular could possibly bring about a depressed mood or being too self-critical. And maybe you can also see through a certain deceptive person or situation without any illusions or wishful thinking. So this would be the positive side. And concerning the global stage, this could mean that, for example, we are seeing through some sort of media deception, or somebody is getting exposed. And it can also have implications on anything concerning water, for example, sea travel or trade. October 10th, when Venus in Virgo is opposite Saturn retrograde in Pisces until November 8th, this could bring about a bleak period, a period of time where we feel like there isn't any beauty in the world, or it just lacks joy in general. Also a lack of romance. Maybe our love lives are going to be a bit dull, and maybe we'll feel a bit lonely, a bit isolated. And of course, globally, this could also mean a deeper slide into not so happy economic times and circumstances, especially with the square to Uranus and Jupiter retrograde in Taurus, which can indicate challenges to one's material stability. On October 11th, the Sun in Libra is opposite Chiron retrograde in Aries, and Mercury also makes an exact opposition on October 14th for about 2 days. So this could result in feeling emotionally hurt, and that we must decide between our own ego and harmony, and possibly a conflict of interest of not being sure how to balance our own needs for control and also diplomatic relationships with others. And perhaps there is a conflict at work for some people. So in general, I would advise to watch your words and think before you act, and don't make any foul compromises where you end up being unhappy and unfulfilled. Also stick to your guns and communicate with integrity, even if that means butting heads with someone. On October 21st, we have the Sun and Mercury in Libra making an exact square with Pluto retrograde in Capricorn for about 2 days. So this means power struggles, but also maybe feeling like someone is challenging or disrupting your peace. Globally, there could be some saber rattling by the big boys and posturing and negotiations that could take on a menacing undertone. And Mercury conjunct Mars in Scorpio opposite Jupiter retrograde in Taurus on October 29th, which lasts for about 2 days, could indicate sneaky attacks that could make us lose our grounding or confidence, possibly also something concerning our reputations, or people talking behind our backs, or us ourselves engaging in such talk, which is a very bad idea, by the way. So watch out for dishonesty and fake friends. And on the other hand, this transit could also bring a bit more spice, possibly some drama, to our love lives or relationship dynamics. How all these transits are going to play out in your own life is always dependent on your birth chart, which is highly individual. And while there are general things that can be applicable to everyone, what is going on in your birth chart is always going to override these very general things. So if you're interested in learning more about that, write me an email at info@sunmoonself.com to book a personalized reading for yourself or someone else. This is also a very cool gift idea, by the way. I am a classically trained, certified Western astrologer, and I do birth chart readings, relationship astrology, medical astrology, as well as predictive astrology, which is, for example, quite interesting for someone who has an upcoming birthday and would like an overall forecast for the coming year. Please follow my YouTube channel, as I'm going to post a brand new video very soon, and I also post some updates in the community tab regularly. My website is sunmoonself.com, where you can find all the social media links where you can follow me or sign up to my newsletter to make sure you never miss out on an update. And now back to Sarah and Thomas.
For this week's folk horror, we are reviewing the 1962 black and white film, These Are the Damned, directed by Joseph Losey and stars Donald Carey, Shirley Anfield, and the gorgeous and broodingly handsome Oliver Reed. And it's a film that has a mix of genres. It's like a sci-fi horror Cold War thriller about the fears and anxieties that were prevalent during the Cold War era. Now, Simon Wells is an American tourist on a boating holiday along the south coast of England, and he meets a young woman called Joan, who is used as bait for mugging tourists by her brother's biking gang. And Simon is mugged by her brother King, and feeling bad, Joan leaves the gang and joins Simon on his boat, and they grow quite close. And Simon feels the need to protect her and take away from this life that she's been living. And they spend the night together in an abandoned house, but King finds them, so they escape down the rocks and cliffs and into a military base where they discover a network of hidden caves. And there they find 9 children living in the caves. They're 11 years old and they are kept in isolation, and they're under constant surveillance and tutored by a man called Bernard via CCTV. And their understanding of the outside world is very limited, and they're deathly cold to touch despite seeming and looking quite healthy. Now, Simon and Jean want to help the children, but the children are part of a secret government experiment. And eventually, King catches up with Joan and Simon, and they manage to convince King to help them help the children. Now, Bernard tells the children that he knows that they're hiding intruders in the caves, and he tells the children to give them up, but the children refuse and they destroy the surveillance cameras. So then Bernard sends men in radiation suits to remove the intruders. And Simon grabs one of the Geiger counters from the men, and he discovers that the children are in fact radioactive. According to Bernard, the children were born radioactive as a result of a nuclear accident, but that meant that they would be resistant to nuclear fallout, so that they would survive an inevitable nuclear war and be able to populate the Earth again with radioactive resistant offsprings. And it's at that point that Bernard's mistress, Freya, nails it in one line when she says that public servants are the only servants who keep secrets from their masters. I'm not going to spoil the ending, but it does lead to quite a sad climax that's reflected in the title of the film. And you can't help but think about the events that led them to that point. If it wasn't for the gang and their racket of mugging tourists, if it wasn't because of Joan's overbearing brother chasing her and Simon onto the rocks because he couldn't mind his own business, then none of them would be in the situation that they found themselves in. And despite its age, the film's still very relevant today, with both ethical and political dilemmas to do with scientific advancements and government secrecy and blind obedience to authority figures, because both the government and the rebels in the story showed unquestioning loyalty to their respective causes and leaders. The officials were no better than the gang, and the gang was no better than the officials with their commitment to their ideologies. And I thought the film covered the dark, uncertain Cold War era perfectly, especially with the black and white and the whole 1960s look of the film, because it portrayed a very fresh and modern looking 1960s with the fashions and the attitudes and a sense of freedom that came from that post-war era, but which were all illusion in the film because the officials knew they were all doomed except for the 9 children.
I think it's a terrific film. I think it's probably more relevant today than it was back in 1962 or whenever it was made. I think it's just a very disturbing film. The ending I find very unsettling, and it also causes me to wonder about how many of these programs actually are still going on in different guises. I kept thinking of someone like Greta Thunberg as if she was she invented in a lab somewhere. And in fact, the wickedness and the fanaticism of the blind obedience, dogma, saturated civil servant, that guy Bernard, he sits there talking about, nuclear war as if it's inevitable. It's definitely going to happen. And Freya says, do you really believe that? And he goes, beyond a doubt, that the world will be destroyed in nuclear fire. Now, That reminded me of the way you talk about climate change today. Do you really believe the ice caps are going to melt and the earth is going to like be flooded and the world, what's left, what isn't flooded, will be bursting into flames? Well, a civil servant in his position today would go, absolutely, 100%. Without, and then would to justify that to do the most appalling wickedness. The film could be easily retitled as a warning against civil servants. Even the way the guy in the army went to visit Freyr's art studio, and he says, I want to understand your art so I may improve my mind. As if he didn't understand art. He didn't understand anything beyond that. And he couldn't grasp the meaning of art. Pure just bureaucracy, government orders, and this kind of thing. The children, I thought the acting was amazing by the kids and very heartbreaking. And that they talked about the Black Death coming down the tunnels and killing everything. And this turns out to be, well, you watch the film, you'll find out what that is. And just that the way it was filmed on the seafront, and it looks like it's kind of like two films glued together. One about an American who comes to England and is shocked to discover that it's full of street gangs, violent street gangs. But also he discovers that there's a darkness in the upper class and the bureaucracy in the middle class as well. Because your man Bernard says to him at the beginning, he goes, "Oh no, Britain has been plagued by gang violence too," or something like that. And the way he says it is so strange. And I'm fascinated by the character of Freya. I think she's Norwegian or something, the artist. And she's such an interesting person. And what the film really tells you at the end is that in a world run by experts and bureaucrats and civil servants, compassion and independent thinking will get you killed.
Yes, those children were quite harrowing, I thought. They had a pet rabbit, if I remember rightly, and it died. And we know why it died. I won't say why it died, but they were afraid that what happened to that rabbit might happen to these intruders, these people, Simon and Joan, because the children were that devoid of love and human contact and human touch that they thought those intruders were their parents had come to rescue them. And I found that quite sad, because in the caves where they were sleeping, they had pictures of adults that they thought was the parents.
Yeah, they were just pictures from magazines and stuff that they just had mummy and daddy.
Yeah.
That they wanted to believe. That was horrible, that they wanted to believe with their parents. And they even said that they had the place that they snuck out that they thought no one could see, but the authorities could see it, but they allowed them a sense of belief that they were free. Oh, it was so typical of today, isn't it? Like the lockdowns and everything. But like one kid says to the other, one time Richard saw a bird. They had such no contact with the outside world, really, other than this little cove at the bottom of the cliffs.
Yeah.
It was all a microcosm of the whole world. The cove, it's funny, like it comes with last week's show on maritime stuff, that the cove represented the shoreline of a place you don't dare want to go to.
Yeah, it was a sad film, a very sad film with a sad ending. There's no other way it could have ended in the way that it did. And
yeah.
Just a sad film. And like you say, the acting from the children was very good. It was, even though it was very middle class accents from the children, but then you would expect that because they were brought up in you've zoomed in again. I thought he was going to come and sit on my knee then. With the accents, they had very posh accents, but you would expect that because they were brought up by civil servants who also had this very middle class accent, but they were just devoid of any love or human contact, and it was quite sad. All that they knew was that they were boys and they were girls, and I think one of the boys put his hand up and spoke to the camera and said, "There's 9 of us. There's 4 boys. I think he said, and 5 girls, or 5 girls and 4 boys. So that means, he said, when we grow up and we choose a partner and we get married, there's going to be one that's left on his own, because they were there to kind of, it was like a Noah's Ark sort of experiment that was going on there. And then Bernard said to them, well, don't you worry about that, because when the time comes, we'll give you instruction and you'll know what you're here to do.
Yeah. And on top of all that, you have Oliver Reed making Elvis look like he's the banjo player from Deliverance. Oliver Reed is unbelievably cool in this film. The way he moves, even the way all his friends in the biker gang are all dressed in like rocker leather jackets, but he's like dressed almost like a country squire, a gangster. And it was kind of the forerunner of his character Bill Sikes in the Oliver musical. There was a lot I could see that. Like, I wonder if the people who were casting for the Oliver musical said, did you ever see Oliver Reed in These Are the Damned? He'd be perfect as Bill Sikes. It definitely was a similar rollover of characters there, and that leather jacket, kill, 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 that kind of thing.
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's a terrific film. There's just not, but it's also a very harrowing and sad. But it makes you think about the world we live in. You know, it's like the Dennis Wheatley things. Was that film that someone somewhere like heard a story of what really goes on in these underground bases? In fact, when I first saw this film on YouTube, I'd seen it when I was a kid, but I saw it on YouTube about 10 years ago, maybe. And it had nearly 1 million views on this one channel. And I would say the majority of discussions on the video and the comments where, you know, this stuff happens in real life. You know, this really goes on. Government do this kind of thing. And then the video on the channel is pulled like that. So it makes you wonder, you know.
I think those kinds of things do go on, and I think to a much greater extent to what that film portrayed. I think that was quite tame in comparison to what really goes on.
Yeah, that you know, we get insights now and again. I think those 2 Swedish twins in England that run onto the M25. I think they were definitely from some kind of research program like that. And that was a bizarre story, that one was. And
I believe Greta is from some kind of
Manchurian or something like that. Yeah, I do believe that too. And I think I often wonder how many of these, like, you look at like some of these like famous activists and stuff, a lot of them don't look human, you know.
And that's the thing with the children in that film. They all looked incredibly human, and they were all very innocent looking children. They were children, weren't they? They looked 11 years old, and they behaved 11 years old, and they were very innocent, which gave it another, that also made it quite poignant and even sad.
They were sweet kids.
Yeah.
They were sweet, kind, caring kids. Yeah. And yet they were just lab rats your man Bernard would destroy if he had to. And just like he did, well, something does later that's absolutely appalling and shows just how dangerous civil servants are at the end of the movie when he does something that's like inconceivably dark.
Yeah.
But yeah, These Are the Damned, I can't fault it really. And even the 1960s look and Weymouth, the city in England it was filmed in, just looked beautiful and everything at the beginning. And then the shots of the cliffs. I'm going to go on the lookout for a good quality DVD version, because it's a bit grainy, the YouTube version, but I bet in the cinema that film looked spectacular.
I will put the link to the film in the description box, because it is on YouTube. So if you want to go and watch it, then it'll be there. Like Thomas said, it is a bit grainy, but it doesn't distract from the overall aesthetic of the film. It's still very watchable.
Yeah, it's a Hammer film too. Before Hammer is an interesting studio. They had like the horror thing going, but they also had kind of the sci-fi thing going as well.
Yeah, do you know, it reminded me of a film version of a Pulp Fiction book, a Pulp Fiction story.
And it was also surrealist. Some of the acting and cinematography remind me of David Lynch. The scene at the beginning where the American guy is beat up and comes into the coffee shop, and there he's talking to Freya and Bernard. The way the camera cuts and the way the dialogue is scripted was very David Lynchy almost. A kind of a sense of otherworldliness about it. Like people wouldn't have a conversation like this in real life in this manner, you know.
It was at that point, I think, you knew something was off. You knew something was off anyway because it was a horror film. But if you'd have just turned that film on and started to watch it with no idea what it was about, you knew something was off in that town. There was something wrong.
Yeah. The character studies are bang on, I thought.
So highly recommended. Go into the description box and when you get time and treat yourself, give it a watch, and then come back here and let us know what you think about it in the comments.
With where I'm living, the weather is dirty, messy. The leaves have fallen from the trees, but they aren't pretty, crispy autumnal leaves. They're mucky, and everything looks very messy and dull, and it's kind of a bit down, and it's kind of reflecting on the psyche. So here, to try and clear it up and bring a kind of a more pastoral sense to the week ahead, is Sarah with the psychic hygiene.
It's time to brighten your mood and let laughter be your guide. Now, please understand, I'm not trivializing anyone's challenges, but rather I'm inviting you to rise above the weight of seriousness, if only for a moment, and discover the humour that often hides in plain sight. This week, why not call upon those divine forces of laughter, those mischievous sprites that live within us all? Ask them to assist you in raising your perspective with humour. Laughter is your spirit singing. So not only is it time to laugh, but also to share your laughter with others. Laughter has a remarkable healing quality, and it can work wonders in dissolving barriers and bringing clarity. Now, consider memes, those contemporary jesters of the digital age. In a world that might seem dark and oppressive, memes cleverly burlesque the few who hold power, like a magical spell, a sigil, or a smudge stick. These memes shrink down those who think they have authority over us and transform them into objects of amusement. Some people laugh and scoff at memes and dismiss them as trivial or childish. Yet the meme possesses the same wisdom and intelligence as the court jester. At first glance, these jesters might appear as simple entertainers, just there to tickle the king's fancy, but they hold the king's trust and possess a profound understanding of what tickles the king's funny bone. And the jester is, in fact, one of the wisest individuals in the court. He hears all, he sees all, and very often the quietest ones carry the deepest wisdom. So this week, take the role of the jester in your own life and find the humour in challenging situations. Share laughter with others and share those memes, and let it be the gift that brings you some inner peace and respite. And that's my psychic hygiene suggestion for this week.
Well, you know, you'll get no argument from me from that one because I live for memes. I think memes are the most popular expression of chaos magic. And I think memes are a gift from the gods to help us defend ourselves against these bizarre entities running the world, whatever they are.
Yeah, use those memes, post them, share them.
And our second topic tonight is that of spectral riders, ghostly horsemen. A very common Fortean topic, a folklore subject, and seems very central to Indo-European cultures. Going right back into the dawn of history, there's always been stories of spectral riders. Now, one of these that seems to dominate the Germanic world is the concept of the wild hunt. The wild hunt being usually pagan gods or other figures from mythology, such as elves and goblins, and sometimes even Lucifer or Satan, leading hordes of wild horsemen across the landscape at night, killing everyone in their path. Now, the German artist, symbolist, painter, Franz von Stuch, painted a remarkable picture of the wild hunt that showed Odin on a horse leading the charge through a landscape of destroyed bodies. And he painted it the year that Hitler was born. And it looks just like Adolf Hitler, including the mustache and the forelock. So this is one of the reasons I think symbolist paintings are special, because they do have a prophetic supernatural quality to them. And in fact, he also painted Medusa, who looked just like Hitler's mother, Carla. Now, it's a side subject to it, but it just goes to show you how powerful within the Germanic culture the concept of the wild hunt is. These spectral horsemen on horseback from the other world charging across the landscape. People have long associated them with a kind of a terror, warning people what would happen if they allowed paganism to take over Europe again. It's almost like the Christians had created a kind of a supernatural folklore myth, although it does have very ancient Indo-European pagan origins, to tell you what would happen if Christianity wasn't here. Now, this shows up in other things, funny enough. Not only do we have the concept of the ghost rider, the ghostly horseman, perhaps the most famous one of all is the headless horseman. And the most famous story of that is Washington Irving's tale of the legend of Sleepy Hollow and the school teacher Ichabod Crane. Now, what's amazing about this story is it's actually based in fact. There really was a headless horseman. When he was a young boy during the Revolutionary Wars in America, there was a battle near what we now call Sleepy Hollow, which is actually North Tarrytown, which is between White Plains in Westchester County in New York and the Hudson River, and settled by mostly Dutch and English colonialists. And these were the ones who broke from the British Empire and fought with George Washington. Now, after the disastrous defeat of the Battle of Long Island, the American forces, the Continental Army, went across and mounted a defense in White Plains, only 8 miles from where what we call Sleepy Hollow is now. And a hollow is not just an area of ground; it's a whole region. So a whole region was called a hollow. It's Dutch word, and it was led by British and Hessian troops. And the Hessians charged on horseback, and an American officer fired a cannon, and the one single shot took the head off the Hessian rider, and he continued to ride towards the American lines, even though he was headless. He was obviously had the dead man's grip or something like that. It turned out later on that this was probably a young officer who had actually saved the baby. Hessians are German troops who fought for the British, who had actually saved the baby in the town where Sleepy Hollow is, from a burning house. They were setting fire to houses, and this guy realized the baby was inside the house and went in and rescued the baby's life. So the family, who, even though they were on the opposite side, gave him a Christian burial in the church ground at Sleepy Hollow, North Tarrytown. And this is how it became an enduring myth of the headless horseman in that part of New York. And eventually Washington Irving wrote the story, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. And it also, the legend was a real folklore, that there was a ghostly rider who traveled at Halloween, and he had no head, and he threw a fiery pumpkin to destroy people. Now, that's interesting because that was obviously Celtic folklore from Samhain. So there was a mixture of Dutch and Celtic folklore in this part of America. Now, then we start looking to the Celtic part of it. And what you get to is a thing called the Dullahan, or the Dullahan in Irish language. And it translates literally as the Black Goblin. And it's a very strong cultural thing in Ireland of the Headless Horseman. And again, no one knows why it's headless. Why, at least in the Sleepy Hollow story, we have the concept that this guy was actually shot by a cannon. But we don't know why you have this in the Celtic countries, but very strongly in Ireland, the Dullahan, this headless horseman. Or he's also a headless coachman sometimes. And sometimes the coach is called the Dullahan, like the goblin, the Black Goblin. And the coach rider is called the Gan Crown, which means no head. And it's always connected to portents of doom. So someone is going, it's like a very similar to the Banshee, that they're here to collect someone's soul. Now, the Dullahan in Ireland, it evokes a terrifying image of a black rider on a black horse with red eyes, and he uses a spinal cord of a man as a whip. I mean, how heavy metal is that? And I don't know what the symbolism of the spinal cord is, but it's very interesting. Of all the things they would pick is that. And he charges across the Irish countryside at night, harvesting souls. And he finds you on the road. Then that reminds us very much of Tolkien's The Black Riders in Lord of the Rings, where Frodo says, "Get off the roads, get off the roads." There's people believe that in folklore that there was this, the Dullahan would be coming down the road, charging at you with no head, and you whipping the horse with a spinal column to come and get you. Now, William Butler Yeats really believed in this story, and he wrote about a road up here called Fiskillen Road, which leads from Sligo town down to the docks. And it's still there to this day, but it was industrialized in the 20th century. And now it's basically, a couple of shopping departments kind of store things, home stores, and down further abandoned oil terminals and stuff. But the place does have a spooky energy about it. And apparently there was a Dullahan that used to actually run up and down that road from along the docks, along that old harbour. And this is before it was developed as an industrial harbour, when it's just a regular, you're talking about like the early 1800s. And people lived in terror of it. Now, there's also some people have seen the etymology, and again, like the Wild Hunt, and Odin has said that it was a story told by early Christians to say, if you don't save your prayers, the Crom Crook, the last pagan god of Ireland, will come and get you and whip you off to hell or off to the other world. And so you have to keep saying a Christian. So there's a theory on that. I don't know about that because the whole thing seems to go back. There's a Scottish version, there's a Germanic version, there's even an Indian version. But I find it fascinating, the concept of the ghost rider, the spectral horse, the spectral rider, and why no head, and the spinal column part is not only in Ireland, it shows up in the German version too as well. So we are dealing with something from pagan times. It's an enduring thing, and it has this element of terror to it, the concept of these galloping hooves of the horse coming charging down a country lane, and you hearing them, and you panicking and trying to get off the road, like Sam and like Frodo and the hobbits did in Lord of the Rings and the Fellowship of the Rings, or Ichabod Crane in The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, the school teacher being chased. And it's a phenomenal subject. And do you have a Headless Horseman story in your part of the world, Sarah?
Not that I'm aware of. I'm aware of the Dullahans in Ireland, and I do believe that they can be frightened away, apparently, by a gold object. If you wear a gold object or you put one in its path, then it won't come near you. Is that right?
Yeah, and silver too. And that ties also with werewolves and vampires that can also be taken out with silver also.
Yeah, and the carriage is made from coffins and tombstones and skeletal remains.
And bones used for the suspension and everything. And it's been was brilliantly done in the film Darby O'Gill and Little People. The coachman came for him at the end. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know he carries the head under his arm, but when he's on his journey looking for souls, he actually lifts it up and he uses it like a lantern to look around. So he's got his head held up above his shoulders and he's using that head and to have a look for souls.
Almost like the Palantir in Lord of the Rings. The
Yeah.
ball, he uses his head that way, you know? I
Yeah.
found that interesting. It's like, it's almost like the head being from is, and also remember in Celtic mythology, the head was considered the place of the soul. The ancient Irish, the ancient Scots, and the ancient, well, Britons, and all the Celtic tribal, I mean, I say Celtic, I mean in quotations, whatever that really means. The belief was that the soul resided inside the human head. And there were head cults among certain Celtic tribes, again, Celtic quotations, such as parts of France and Spain, where they would actually collect the heads of their slain enemies in battle as a way of like saying you can't have your soul. Kind of brings us back to the Burke and Hare story a little bit. And so that is probably a leftover from pagan times that you have to, it's almost like a shamanic thing when you think about it, that he couldn't look for these souls while he had his head on his shoulders. But if he took it off and turned it into a kind of a scrying or device or something, you know, a palantir, he could.
I've been thinking about it today, actually. I always have some thoughts about what could be at the bottom of this story, what it could represent really, in the sense of it being folkloric. And the sound of the coach seems to be like you said, it's a portend of some kind. So in this case, for the sound of the death call, like what the banshees have, the wail, or when you hear the coach coming up the road, that's the death call of the Doulahan. And apparently the coach can't, once the coach arrives here, it can't leave empty, which is symbolic, I think, of the fact that we're all going to die eventually. And it's like the story of the Grim Reaper. He comes to everyone when it's time, and there's no escaping that. And it's the same with the Doulahan. You can avoid him, but when it's your time, you will see him. And I think that's what that legend is kind of trying to portray.
Yeah.
They're all omens of death, but death and life are sort of part of the same cycle. So it can also be seen as meaning fertility, as in Crom, excuse my pronunciation, Crom Crack.
Cruach.
Crom Cruach, the fertility god. And I believe the Doulahan is said to derive from Crom Cruach, because
one folklorist says it could be possible, but I haven't looked into it. But yeah, sure, definitely. No, why not?
Yeah, because Crom, wouldn't he demand human sacrifice through the first
that's what the Christians said about him, but he was a basic, from what we can tell, he was like, it's the same story with Baal. He was very similar god to Baal. He was a heart, well, not so much fertility but more like the fruitful harvest god.
Right. Okay. So then when Christianity came to Ireland in the 6th century, Christianity kind of grew in Ireland, and that stopped it altogether. And that was when the story of the Doulahan, it is said, first became known, because the Irish people believed that Crom Cruach took his physical form of the Doulahan in order to continue getting his sacrificial souls. I don't know if that's true. That's just some of the reading that I'd been doing about it. That was just one.
Yeah, well, the Christians turned everything around. You know, we don't really know the story. They also said the Crom Cruach was a giant maggot, a giant worm. So we don't, and by all accounts, he was a fertility deity.
Yeah.
So harvest deity of the fields, John Barleycorn type thing. But they demonized everything. So we don't know. They don't know. You know, they said sacrifices were done in his name, but the only proof of that is Christian records saying it was done in his name.
Well, the research I did on that led me to actually a film called The Phantom Carriage from 1921, which was a Swedish silent film. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's about a man called David, who's a drunkard, and he's sitting in a graveyard telling his two drinking friends about his old friend George, who told him about the legend that the last person to die each year has to drive death's carriage and collect the souls of everybody who dies the following year. And George himself died on New Year's Eve the previous year, so he's due to be out and about this year collecting the souls on New Year's Eve. And it's about the driver of a ghostly carriage who forces this drunken man to reflect on his selfish and wasted life before taking him. And that's 1921.
1921. I was just looking at the book that I'm reviewing in the book segment tonight, and it's funny, like there seems definitely being a synchronistic theme running out throughout here. Things. Remember with the ghostly carriage, right? There was also people being carried away from plagues. They would be all dumped in the back of a wagon, or a carriage, or a cart, or drawn by a horse and taken away. It could be something like that, you know. It could be a kind of I don't know what the word is, a folklorization of the plague carriage. And if you think about it, like the plague, the guy come, bring out your dead, those types. He would become a kind of a demon later on, because people would, when I was a little boy or a little girl, and the plague was going around, this guy dressed in black came along with a face mask going, ringing a bell, going, bring out your dead. As you could see how that could morphize into the carriage version of the story.
Also, in relation to the wild hunt that you mentioned earlier, the role, we know that Odin is part of that folklore in some areas of the world.
Wotan.
Yeah.
He's known in Germany as Woden or Wotan, yeah.
Is that Wotan? Yeah, that's what I'm just going to mention now.
Same god, though.
Yeah, the role of Wotan in the wild hunt, especially during the Yuletide period, it was believed to have influenced the development of the Dutch Christmas figure. Anyway, it's a Dutch Christmas figure which eventually came to be known as Saint Nicholas, and then the American counterpart.
Oh yeah, with the red outfit and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, like Odin seems to have been evolved into lots of different archetypes.
And then another thought that struck me today was the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse.
Yep.
Is that a derivative of these phantom horses?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it would have been. I definitely, the concept of the riders, you know, I think that might be an ancient folk memory of the first Indo-Europeans. Because remember, the Indo-Europeans conquered. They conquered, well, their ancestors conquered the world, well, Europe, with 2 things. They developed the ability to digest lactic acid, so they could actually make milk and cheese. They were stronger than the proto people, and they also had horses. So, and they would charge across the steppes, you know, slashing and hooking. That could come from that too as well, you know. And you see the card, the death card in the tarot is a black rider on a horseback with the white rose, and yeah, there you go, you know. So it's very interesting how it's all so similar. And what, you know, we have the Dullahan, there's other versions of that. We have the wild hunt, we have the haunted carriage, we have the headless horseman, we have the 4 horse the apocalypse, and we have the Black Riders from Tolkien. It's quite remarkable how even today we're still saturated with that story. I remember a Hammer film, I can't remember the name of it, when I was growing up, and it was about smugglers down in Cornwall who would ride across the marshes, and they'd paint bones on their horses to look like their skeletal horses, and wear suits that had bones painted on them. And it terrified me as a kid watching the scenes in the film where these skeleton men riding across the marshes down in Cornwall somewhere. Yeah, I mean, it's just something about this. I think that, you know, it's one thing for a ghost to change you, right? but a ghost on a mighty steed is something else. You know, that's another thing altogether, because it's going to be harder to get away from him.
Yeah, there's something about the horse, isn't there? I think it's a symbol of power. If you owned a horse, you was a very powerful person and probably quite rich. So to be a spirit on a ghostly horse shows that you have power in the afterlife, in the supernatural world. You've got speed, you've got grace, you've got power, you've got the ability to chase, you've got velocity, got everything.
And then you've got like Pegasus, who can fly in the Greek mythology. And you've also got Shadowfax in the Tolkien mythology, the king of the horses, who's the other side of the coin, a kind of like almost like a Jesus Christ of the horses. I think, what's the common denominator? The horse, right? Regardless if it's Odin, the Dullahan, the carriage, the horse is the actual common denominator. So, you know, in ancient, it's probably a leftover of an ancient thing of our ancestors knowing that anyone with a horse had power over life and death on them, because you had no chance against someone with a horse, either in a battlefield or even in the world.
You could bring unicorns into this, couldn't you? Where did they come from? I mean, that is a horse. The unicorn, it's got the thing. I don't know where they originated from, what the story behind they are.
They originated in the Odenwald in southern Germany, and they're associated with an entity called the Wildenwichem, which is a virgin who lives in the forest. And there's all kinds of stories of the wild woman who lives she's a virgin and she lives with the unicorn, and her chastity is related to a knight who has to come in and kill the unicorn to get the woman or something like that. It's very interesting, but it originates probably from the Odenwald. And it's got a strong Christian motif as well to it. The unicorn is often symbolic of Jesus. So it just goes to show you how deeply embedded the whole concept of the spectral equine rider or images inside ourselves.
Do you know of any books or reference material where you could find a good interpretation of the symbolism of a horse that's not really new agey and fluffy, but actually gets to the meat and bones of it?
No, but I'm sure there's plenty out there. There's enough people interested in horses and things like that to actually have written it. I'm definitely sure there has to be something out there. But me personally, I'm not that interested in horses. So, but yeah, I bet there is. Have like the film A Man Called Horse, Richard Harris, and that's a shamanic kind of film about Native Americans. Again, now wherever the horse is, there's something. And then you have Caligula, and his whole, the thing that people held most against him, apart from the fact he was incestuous, was in an incestuous relationship, was that he had a sexual relationship with his horse.
Right.
So, I mean, there's a very complex relationship between humans and horses.
Horses are also very healing as well. They're using a lot of healing. If you touch a horse, it does feel quite magnificent. If you can get close enough to one, there's something about being in the company of a horse that just makes you feel quite humble.
Yeah, definitely.
The size of them or what it is, but they do feel very spiritual animals.
Yeah, definitely. There's a kind of a majesty about them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the spectral riders, the ghost riders, the ghost carriages. If you have anything to add on this, add some more on the bottom in the comments, because I think this is a subject that we'll be returning to in different forms as time goes on. And if you have any stories you've missed, I know there's a few, but in what we love is regional ones. So not so much a big well-known one that you can find online, but if you live in a certain area where, like, say, I live in this place and there's a story of a ghost rider, that kind of thing. We love those kind of local folklore things. So tell us about that.
Will it be cloudy with a chance of Renfields, blustery with a downpour of babblers, or will it be plain sailing with clear skies and calm waters? Keep your rain mats, umbrellas, and suntan lotion handy because you never know from one week to the next. It's time to go over to Thomas for the psychic weather.
Well, this week's psychic weather is a bit different. I want to talk about what I experienced this week, and it might be helpful to others because we're in a certain season of the witchcraft, if you want to put it that way. The title of this could easily be, what exactly is the Rona? Now, I know some people say that it doesn't exist, that it's just the flu or a cold with a new name. I can tell you for a fact it is different. This is the second time I've had it. The second time I've had the Rona, and it's not like a regular cold or flu. It's something else different. Now, in both cases, first of all, I got over it very quickly thanks to an alternative method, which I can't talk about on a public forum because I don't want to get the channel in trouble, and I don't want this person who helped me to get in trouble. But anyway, there are alternatives. It felt like a parasitic force invading my body. The first time it happened to me, I wanted to know why I felt this way, like I felt like someone was taking me over and altering my dreams. We all remember the first days of the ping pong, and back in the old days of 2020, the media were like, are your dreams strange? It was almost like we were living in that movie, These Are the Damned, like they were like just studying us like we were those children. And I remember that was a real eye-opening moment for me in all this. And I got the same feelings this time again. On top of the shift in consciousness, on top of the symptoms, which are very similar to a regular seasonal infection, you have the strange sensation that something's trying to get inside you and take you over. You have the strange sensation of self-doubt, like whatever this thing is inside you, it's trying to get you to feel bad about yourself. It fills you full of self-doubt. It fills you full of insecurities. It also makes you feel helpless. And when you try to sleep, it puts you into a bizarre dream world. And it caused terrible joint pains for me, but in very specific areas, the back of the kneecaps and in the elbow joints in the arm, but really not much else. And again, it's gone. I got over it very quickly, but when it was leaving me, I felt the profound change in me. Like I really felt like there was two life forces inside me, and one tried to take over, but it wasn't strong enough to do it. But it almost like resented me for not allowing me to allow it to become its host. So I don't know what the stuff is. I don't know what it is. And I would like to know, but part of me doesn't want to know either, because of what's going on in the world. So those of you who come down with the ping pong in the next few weeks, this video will help you deal with the psychic weather of the biological changes it puts inside you, and just ride the thing out. Just ride it out. And I know some people got it and they didn't. It burnt out after a week, but they all have the same issues of self-doubt and insecurity and things you don't feel. Like it's almost like it wants you to dislike yourself so you can make your immune system fail. So that's a psychic weather this week. This thing is about the parasite is amongst us, and you're strong enough once you haven't been transubstantiated to just to let it fail. And that's a psychic weather with me, Thomas.
interesting analogy, because when you picked it up and it went in, it got in, at that point, it won't have known that you weren't into the craft of needlecraft, the art of sewing and embroidery. So it won't have known. And then obviously when it's tried to take a hold of you, it's realised it's not able to, because you're not into embroidery. So that's probably why you felt like it was pissed off with you, because it couldn't get a hold of you, because it knew, oh, I picked the wrong one here.
That's exactly what it felt like. I wasn't a Britney Spears. It felt very much that way. And that's probably why, because it probably only gets one chance. You know, I can totally believe stories when people say it's a kind of an alien entity or an interdimensional entity or something that destroys your immune system. And the fact that a certain type of treatment that you might want to interject the sound of a horse neighing here. I can get that for you if you don't.
Ivor the engine.
Yes, like Ivor the engine. Yeah. Yeah, that sounds like Ivor the engine. And operates by flushing parasitical organisms outside of the body. And I just wonder if it's also flushing psychic parasites outside of the body as well, and that's how it works. And it would also make sense as to why this Ivor the engine, which before 2020 was considered a miracle medication, was suddenly outlawed.
And it gets one chance, and if it picks the wrong host, then it's gone.
Yeah, it's like the troops that landed on the beach at Normandy. Some of them didn't make it off the beach. It'd be like that for them.
Now imagine how bad you felt, and your immune system's intact. Imagine how those people whose immune system's shot to bits,
who've been
gets a hold of them. I can't imagine.
Hence the statistical data we're being seen at the moment around all the Western countries.
Yeah, I can only imagine it would feel like you were being eaten alive from the inside.
Well, when you think about it, if it invades your body, this would be seen as like something, like say an army storms the beach, right? Yeah. And the beach has barbed wire and minefields on it. Those who have been Britney Spears probably don't have their barbed wire and minefields.
But the good news is you had it, you come through it. So you are topped up with immunity now and are good to go for at least another 12 months. Yeah.
And being an asthmatic, it affected that in no way. So it goes to show you, if you get this thing, don't panic. Just get some, soup and tea into you. And if you can find the Ivor the engine, great. If not, it'll burn itself out. But that's basically it. It just goes to show you that human beings are a lot more stronger than they figured we would be.
Now it's the perfect moment to open up another book and engage in a delightful session of sharing and showcasing our selected books of the week, freshly picked from the beloved shelves of our personal libraries. And this week, my book is Albion Dreamtime by Peter Knight and Sue Wallace. A beautiful A4 glossy book looking at the mystical and sacred landscapes of Albion, including England, Wales and Scotland. And I had the pleasure of getting this book during the Mysterious Earth conference, where I also had the opportunity to meet the authors in person. And the book's divided into sections that cover every corner of the Isle of Albion, from the north to the south and from the east to the west. And each section of the book is just beautiful, with a full page on one side and the author's stunning personal photographs on the other side, which showcases a particular location to visit as they travelled around the country visiting each place in the book. And the information given is very in-depth, and it's not only the geographical details, but also the history and the legends and the folklore that are connected to each location that each page is showing. And it talks about how magical and spiritually charged the land feels in these remarkable places. And the book reminded me a little bit of The Modern Antiquarian by Julian Cope, but Albion Dreamtime goes a bit further by delving deep into the spiritual and magical dimensions of these sacred sites, while Julian Cope's work primarily focuses on the physical aspects of ancient sites. And Peter Knight and Sue Wallace take you on a pilgrimage, unearthing the energies and the myths and the stories that have been connected with each location for millennia. And the author's love for Albion's sacred landscapes just oozes off every page, and it'll make you want to go on your own spiritual quest and connect with ancient energies and ancestors of this ancient land, or even your own ancient land. And it's a beautiful book with high quality photographs and a great resource for anyone who's looking for a deeper connection with the sacred soul of Albion. And I'm just going to open it and just show you, if I can get that on camera, some of the pages there. Gorgeous it is. It goes quite in depth into these places. I got it signed as well, because as I say, I bought it direct from the author at the Mysterious Earth. And Peter Knight actually gave a talk at the Mysterious Earth, which was very interesting, on the Christianity and the stolen symbols from paganism, which was very, very good. So I highly recommend the book there. And it was you actually, Thomas, that said, get that book. It's really good. You need to buy that. So I did.
No, it wasn't that book. It was the other one, Sacred Symbols.
I got that as well.
Yeah, and I know I don't have the other book, but I looked at it. I've looked at that. But they're both beautiful books. That they're just so classy in how they're put together, and they're useful too. Like you said, they're really good travelogues as well.
Did you review the other one, the symbol book?
We did on the show. Yeah. This is amazing, the synchronicity that happened. So I said, what book am I going to review this week? So today I went into my antiquarian library of my old books, and I have this 1880 copy of the Journal of the Plague Year by Daniel Defoe. This is published about 100 years after the original one was published. Beautiful book with an embossed cover. I don't know if you can see it. The book is still fairly easy to get, but not this one. This is a collector's edition. And I picked this up for a bargain in a charity shop, so I was over the moon about it during the lockdowns. Now, Daniel Defoe was 5 when the last great bubonic plague of London happened. So he wasn't old enough to remember what happened, but his uncle relayed all the stories to him of the things that went on. And he created a kind of a fictional / historically accurate account of what happened during the plague year of 1665, okay, in London. And it deals a lot with the East End of London, places like Stepney and Spitalfields and Whitechapel, ironically, and how meticulous research went into it, as well as memories of his uncle's stories that told him what it was like. Now, I just pulled this out by random. Now, remember, I bought this during the lockdown, so it became a kind of an accompaniment to what was happening to us. And it was one of the things that said to me, you know, we don't have a plague. We don't have this, we don't. But he lists some of the restrictions that were put upon people in the East End of London. Every visited house to be marked. That every house, these were mandates handed down from the officialdom, that every house visited be marked with a red cross of a foot long in the middle of the door, evident to be seen, and with these usual printed words, that is to say, Lord have mercy upon us, to be set closed over the same cross, and there to continue until lawful opening of the same house. Now, what the hell is that? When they locked all the old people in the homes and let them to their own thing. Every visited house to be watched. Here we go. That the constables see every house shut up and to be attended with watchmen, which may keep them in and minister necessities unto them at their own charge, or the common charge if they were unable to. The shutting up to be space of 4 weeks after all be whole. That precise order be taken that the searchers, keepers, and buriers are not to pass the streets without holding a red rod or wand of 3 foot in length, social distancing, in their hands, open and evident to be seen, and you're not to go any closer to them. And it goes on with that. And this was just amazing. This is the page of 63 I picked up. Hackney coaches, that care be taken of hackney coachmen, that they may not, as some of them have been observed to do, after carrying of infected persons to the pest house and other places, be admitted to common use till their coaches be well aired, and have stood unemployed by the space of 5 or 6 days after such new service. We were living in the 1600s in 2020. It's just, now I was reading this all through 2020, and it talks about, how it progressed up a certain street, but yet people knew very little about how infectious disease spread back then. But yet they still loved locking people up and having them die behind closed doors, and using it as an excuse to stop them from being mobile. In fact, they had a term back in 1665 for people who they believed were carrying the plague to be called the destroyers. And on all accounts, people were to avoid the destroyers. And you have regional lockdowns, neighborhood lockdowns, and at the end of the book, and how the churches closed their doors and wouldn't let the people in. And at the end of the book, it was something I find quite remarkable, and it's also like us when it comes to the needlecraft. He said, and so it is, how come I'm alive when everyone else around me is dead? And it's like, how come we didn't take the needlecraft when everyone else around us did, or fell for it? So I highly recommend, and it's available as a modern copy, quite cheap, Journal of the Plague Year by Daniel Defoe. You'll read this and think about 2020 with your jaw on the floor reading it.
I think reading that, say 10 years ago, you'd read it and think, it's pretty nasty, but you wouldn't feel it. Now you read it and you feel it and you get angry and you think, wow, and it triggers you and it gives it another dimension because you've lived through it now. So you really understand what is going on in those pages. It's not just a story or a memoir. You have now experienced that. So you have now got something in common with the author.
And while the poor and the merchants and the labourers of the East End of Stepney and Whitechapel were locked in their homes, nailed shut with a red cross on the door, the landed gentry were going off to their stately homes in the countryside unimpeded.
Question: was there any pot banging back then?
Probably no. Well, those bring out your dead. That would have been used as a psychological weapon. But what's the old cliche? Those who don't remember history are doomed to repeat it. And the book's lovely. This version of it. This is artwork on the front, and the bind is by human skin. It's all embossed.
Got any illustrations in it?
No, just loads of just details, but told in a story kind of way. They're not just cold statistics or anything like that. But in the back, there's for this company that published it, Morley's Universal Library. It's actually an American company. And the first thing they do is Sheridan's plays. In the back, they have their Messrs. George Rutledge and Sons list of announcements of upcoming volumes and books. And there's some really interesting stuff in here. Modern Magic, a treatise on the art of conjuring. This is not an advertisement or a paid endorsement. I bought this myself. But there's a series of magazines from All About History publications on Fortean subjects that have hit the newsstands in the UK and Ireland at the moment. And they're absolutely fantastic. If you've ever looked at the All About History magazines, they take basically a historical subject and they bring it to life with very high quality magazines, beautiful graphics, very good writing, in depth, but simple and straightforward. And the magazines are almost like collectible books themselves. They don't have ads or anything in it. So it seems to be for the month of October, because of Halloween and Samhain, they've released a series of magazines. There's one on the spellcraft. There's one on all ghosts. There's one on the Salem witch trials. There's one on magicians and the occult. And they're all on the main newsstands of all the big magazine shops. And the one I picked up to read on the train was The History of Ghosts. And it's a bit expensive. It cost me €17, but magazines are, I don't know, more much cheaper in England. Magazines are heavily taxed in Ireland. But in England, it's £10.99. And that's the retail price. But I tell you something, you get your money's worth because it's beautifully illustrated, full of all kinds of articles. And I have to say, there was a lot of new stuff in here that I didn't know about before. And it's well written, and it's a great Fortean book in its own right. And so it has lots of historical graphics and information in it. And there's a whole series of them. And the ghost ones, I bought it just out of something to read on the train, but I was glad I did because it's great. And so it's published by the people who write the All About History magazines. So if you're interested in this season's ghostly stuff and you want something like an occult magazine or something to read, you can get this. And I think it'll be a good collector's item. It's going to be in my library. Put it this way, it's not going to be a magazine that I'm going to like read and throw away. It'll join my Fortean Times and my Man, Myth and Magic and all the other magazines I've collected over the years, Faith and so on. So yeah, it's not an ad. It's just a bit of friendly little bit of what's the word?
Chit chat.
Reader alert, Fortean readers alert. Yeah, something like that. So that's it.
Is it called The History of Ghosts on every publication, or is that just the name of that particular edition?
Just this one. But they're produced by the All About History company that make historical magazines. But they'll do one on Napoleon, or they'll do one on, the Borgias. Now this was on ghosts, and then there's another one on spells, another one on occultists, another one on the Salem witch trials. So it's a handy way of getting a kind of a Fortean reference library without too much work. And I nearly finished it on the train. It was so interesting, but also it's got full of great photographs and artwork. And remember, like in the like we spoke about this before, and it's also you wrote about it in our upcoming book about how the internet in the early days was brilliant. And there was so many, especially with Fortean, there was so much stuff out there on GeoCities and Tripod and all these other Yahoo chat and all these other things, MSN groups on Fortean stuff, and there was tons of it. And all those websites are all gone because it was all taken over by social media. Well, this kind of had that vibe for me. Each page is like reading a website from like 2000. So that's what I really liked about it. And
those websites back then are fantastic. You could find anything you wanted within seconds. And
yeah,
when you're researching for topics for our show now, it's very difficult to find anything reliable without it being creepypasta. Do you know what I mean? To find something reliable in the form of research. Yeah. So actually, if anyone's listening and they've got any suggestions of good websites for Fortean research, please let us know, because it's getting harder and harder to find reliable sources of information for this stuff. and we don't
Yeah,
want
or
the show to turn into creepypasta.
Reddit was quite good, but it's just not interesting anymore.
No.
And then there's other stuff that all the truthers have taken it over, and it's gone to shite. Like Godlike Productions, when that first started out, that had a lot of interesting stuff on it, but now it's just pure
No.
truthers. But
No.
that's but also we shouldn't be depending too much on the internet. They took it from us, the proper internet. So that's why we have to build a paper Fortean library. End of. So if you want to start your Fortean library and you live in the UK or Ireland, you can go and get this, and then you can put it on your bookshelf. And when I want to hear about the history or something on ghosts, there you go.
We've come to that time of the night again where it is time to say good night and thank you for watching and joining us this Sunday. As always, don't forget to leave your thoughts and opinions and theories in the comments, because we're always interested to read what you have to say about the topics and the segments that we discuss on this show.
Yes, thanks again, everybody. Fantastic numbers. And thank you once again, Sarah, for hosting the show. I've just been so busy, and it's been great that you've been able to pick up the slack on that. And hopefully when you're busy, I will return the favor to you. In the meantime, I love your little after show program that you made last week. And I think that's I think those you got me inspired now. I just wish I had time to make things. I don't. Don't forget to visit Olivia's YouTube channel and send her a message if you want a personal reading. And if you have any location reports, I know I haven't done for busy, but also it's summer's really the time that they get made. But if you have one, don't be shy, send it in. And if we think it's right for the show, we'll gladly broadcast it to promote your own channel.
I haven't got a witching hour for you this week, unfortunately, because I have been quite busy and it's not something you can rush to do and to write down. It kind of it just comes natural. It's what's the word? It just evolves and it kind of writes itself. You can't force it, but I will endeavour to have one done in the next couple of weeks, another one, and I will try and get them out as often and regular as I can do. So it won't be a one-off, I promise you that.
But one thing Sarah can do right now is tarot.
And the tarot of the week this week is the Justice card. And the Justice card in the tarot brings together the concepts of balance and equilibrium. And it symbolises various aspects of this balance, including duality, karma, and the representation of opposing forces, like the pillars of Solomon's temple. What we put into our lives, or what we pour our energy into, is what we get back. So, for example, if we're hostile and angry towards people all the time, then that is usually reflected in what comes to us in life. So, in effect, we are always served with justice. So, garbage in, garbage out, quality in, quality out. And the card is the 11th card in the pack, and the number 11 signifies equality. It consists of two wands, just like the two pillars of Solomon's temple, showing balance. And these pillars, which represent duality, are on either side of the central pillar where justice sits. And the curtains that join the two sides together are bringing the two sides together to bring about justice. And the crown on top of Justice's head represents the inner spirit, while the square with a circle in the middle is showing the spiritual within the physical form. The sword held by Justice symbolises the need to be mentally astute in order to see and understand the need to cut away what is no longer necessary or beneficial to us. The dynamic between the two opposing forces, as shown in the card, and then coming back to the centre, shows the importance of not dwelling too long on either extreme, and to assess aspects of our own lives to restore balance. So reflecting on a situation, the path of events that led you to that point, and how you can realign again with the middle path. And the sword can also be used to cut away anything that hinders your progress or no longer serves a purpose. So the Justice card is all about finding equilibrium in life by restoring harmony between the opposing sides, making balanced decisions and removing obstacles that get in the way of your journey towards justice and fairness. Now, the card usually shows up when you're faced with a decision where the outcome may have some long-term effect in the future. So it's important to understand the impact that your choices can have on both your own well-being and that of others. So prepare to take responsibility for your actions, as they can and will hold you accountable.
It's also the card of natural equilibrium and justice, a very strong natural law type card, that if something is put out of balance, it will swing back to the middle. No matter what you try to do, it will always find an equilibrium. Hence the scales. Hence, it's actually called adjustment, I believe, in the top deck. For that reason, big karmic aspect to it as well. And it's often, sometimes we'll say it's associated with signing contracts. So if you're asked to sign a contract, some people will go in the upright position. Remember, like, one card isn't the whole tarot, isn't the whole answer, by the way, as we said last week. Or, in the down position, maybe think a little deeper about it, or re-examine the contract, that kind of thing. So it's a good one for taking pause when making business or rushing into things that may have long-term legal repercussions. Like if you got it upside down next to the Lovers, you might want to think about not rushing into marriage. Sorry to put a damper on romantic stuff there, but this is why we use these things. And of course, the other way around. Or even if it's you plan to have a baby and you get like the Ace of Cups and you're a woman and you get the Justice card pointing down and say, well, maybe I'll hold off. Not the right time for a baby just yet. Again, go with your instincts. These are guiding forces, guiding oracles. They're not determination things. So remember, you always have free will. They help you. They don't order you. So thank you very much for that, Sarah. And thank you, everybody, for watching the show. We're on SARA MONDAINI channel this week and probably next week. I don't know. See us. Bye.
Stay strange. Bye.